Okay, now we come to the thumb. The problem with the thumb with people who've played in this kind of a position for a long time is the thumb often hasn't had to do anything. It just sort of sits there and orders the arm around. It says, arm, I want to play on the 6th string, and then the arm moves there. And then arm, I want to play on the 3rd string, and the arm moves there. And the thumb doesn't really get much exercise or learn to do much of anything itself. And that's why you get people doing chords and things, that they do the thumb first and the fingers first, because the arm is pulling the fingers and pulling the thumb, and of course it doesn't sound too good either. It's not as solid a chord as you could get. But anyway, the whole thing with the thumb is to make sure that it maintains its independence and does its own work. So you should be able to use the thumb without really moving the fingers at all. Now, one way of testing this out is play some notes, so say on the 1st string, and get your hand nice and relaxed, and then just put your fingers very loosely on that string, and then try playing with the thumb. Now with the thumb you're doing exactly the opposite thing of what the fingers are doing, but with exactly the same result. You're starting at the middle of the thumb, you're pushing the string down with the middle of the thumb, sliding from the middle to the back edge of it, and getting out of the way of the next string. So you're making kind of little ovals. You're pulling your thumb in towards your hand, and then as soon as you've got to the point where you would be hitting the next string, you get out of the way by pulling it up around that way. So you should be able to do this kind of thing with your thumb, and only your thumb is moving, your wrist is relaxed, your fingers are just hanging there, and they're right in position where they could play anything you wanted to anytime. You could try also doing things like this, of sliding over 3 or 4 bases, again without doing anything with your hand. Another good test to test your hand position is if you would try playing an apoyando with the A finger back over, say, 3 or 4 notes, and then try an apoyando with the thumb over 3 or 4 notes, and then try to do them both together. This is actually a very nice way of playing a quick chord. If you need a chord, a 6-note chord that is going to sound as though you played it with 6 fingers, you can do it that way by just pulling the A back, keeping it a little bit. You probably have to straighten it out a little bit more and get your wrist out from the guitar even a little bit more to reach it. Because the further your wrist is out, the more strings you can cover with a given swipe, shall we say. If you're really in close, and you probably only can hit 1 string at a time, the further away you get, the more stuff you can hit. So that's a good experiment and a good exercise to find if your hand position and wrist position are as centered as possible, because you want your hand right at the center of gravity of everything you're doing, so that your thumb is being pulled in toward the center of gravity of your hand, the fingers are moving in toward the center of gravity of your hand, and there's plenty of room under there. See, lots of space for all that to happen. You've got lots of, I'm going to turn this sideways as I can so you can really see, you've got quite a lot of room there to move. Okay? Now, one little trick with chords is that, again with this power grip, it tends to do this kind of a motion. This is a very easy thing for hands to do. So if you had, say, a round cup or something, you could turn the lid this way very easily and not so easily the other way. This is why jars have screws that when you're trying to tighten it, it goes this way. Screwdrivers also, they're all built for right-handed people, so that's why they turn that way, because this is the way hands work. This is also the way chords work. So with a chord, you can't obviously have your hand exactly over each string, because you've got 3 different strings with the fingers and 1 with the thumb, and they won't all be perfect. So what you do when you're playing a chord is, and you can see Presti doing this on any tapes of her, is you put your fingers down, and maybe 1 of them or 2 of them will be just perfect, and the nail would be right up against the string, right in the beginning of the stroke, which is what you need. You don't want the nail to hit later. It's got to be right there in the beginning. So maybe one or two are right, maybe only one is right, whatever. But what you do is then you tilt your fingers very, very slightly. You pivot them sort of in their sockets, a little bit like so. Just pivot them around so that you snuggle the string up against the nail, or snuggle the nail up against the string. So you're doing a little bit of a little bit of a circular motion. You're not kind of coming up that way, but you're coming up with a little bit of a screwing on a jar of peanut butter or a jar of jam or something, or wringing out a dish rag kind of a motion. And you'll see Presti doing that. And that's important to do that pulling around, because that'll make you a nicer sound. So in general, relax your hand really, really loosely. Let your fingers flop. Let them just move from here. Try to make sure that the nail is right there in the beginning, and of course as smooth as possible. And push back toward the... When you get it right, you'll feel as though you're playing very, very loudly, you're making a big sound, and you aren't making very much effort. If you feel you have to make an effort, a strong effort, or that you're tense at all to do this, then you're not doing it right. It's the same kind of thing as if you're hammering a nail into a wall, let's say. You're holding the hammer. If you're doing it right, you go whap, and you're almost throwing the hammer at the nail. Let's say you're confident enough, you're not worried if you're going to miss the nail. You just take the hammer and go bam. No, when it really works and the nail really goes in well, what you'll find is that you're really not holding on to the hammer all that hard when you're contacting the nail. You already kind of loosened up. You're basically getting the thing going and then just letting it go. So you're not tense all the way through. So you're not directing your fingers at all. You just let them, get them lined up, give them a shove, and then there they go. Now, a little bit about the left hand. Let's imagine that this is the fingerboard. Put your fingers, well, one thing about position actually I should deal with first. If you just let your arm relax, hang down, then you bring it up with your elbows still just hanging down next to your body. Then see where you can reach without doing anything with your elbow. That's where the fingerboard ought to be. So that will determine where you put the footstool, how high your knee is, where you can move, all sorts of things. But you want that to be so that it's really comfortable and you don't have to do anything fancy to get your hand in position, or reach down or do any sort of weird stuff. You just want it to be there. Okay, now let's imagine you're going to put your fingers on, let's say, with a nice reasonable stretch, as though this were a fingerboard. Then put your thumb and see if you feel well supported. Your thumb will probably be about underneath your second finger, maybe even under between your second and third. It's not going to be over here somewhere, which is where a lot of people have it, sort of underneath. They hold the fingerboard as though they were holding the first and second finger, the first finger and the thumb. And then these fingers are not supported at all. They feel as though they're just kind of banging around. Again, to take the analogy of the hammer and the nail, if you have a nail that's out on a board that's waving around in the breeze that isn't on anything, and you try to hammer the nail down, nothing happens because the wood just bounces around and you aren't able to push at all hard. This happens with a lot of guitarists. They feel very unstable with their 3 and their 4. They don't feel they can really work there because they aren't supporting it with their thumbs, so they aren't really holding on very well. Now, that will tell you where your thumb needs to go. It needs to go in back of the center of gravity of your hand, which is going to be probably in this general area around in there somewhere.